Okay, good evening everyone. This past week we had International Women's Day, and right now we are having for March is the National Women's History Month in the United States. So in honor of that, I'm going to do a presentation about a woman scientist who is not known by many as a scientist. This is going to be followed up in the next week by our on-site team. They're going to each present a different woman scientist that they have chosen, and they're going to do a 5 to 10 minute PowerPoint presentation. The following week, all of you are going to do one, except the people here because they've already done it. And so I'm going to, when I get home tonight, I'm going to email to everybody a list of 38 different famous women scientists, or women who should be famous. And you will choose, you will put down your first, second, and third choice. And you will send that to me in a text. And because it comes in a text, I know exactly who was first, and then it's first come, first serve. Okay? And if all three of your choices are taken, I'll let you know and give you another chance. So, like I said, I'll send that out tonight, and you can get back to me whenever. But it's not this coming Friday. That'll be the people on site who are working on their PowerPoints, but the following one. You will have until the Wednesday before the presentation for you to send that to Carl. And when you send it to him, you need to state whether it's going to require sound or video. If you have an embedded video, he needs to know that ahead of time to be prepared for it. So I will send that out. If you have any questions, you can email me or text me, either one. So tonight, I'm going to talk about a lady named Heady Lamar. And the first thing I want to know is, have any of you any idea who Heady Lamar is?
Could you close up?
No responses at all? So nobody's heard of Heady Lamar. Good, then you've got a lot to learn tonight. Make sure I put it on here. A quote from Heady. Any girl can be glamorous. All she has to do is stand still and look stupid. So, the next slide there has a photograph of Heady Lamar. She lived from 1914 to the year 2000, so quite a long time actually, about 86 years old before she died. But one thing you can see, although it's an earlier time, people look different, she was quite beautiful. Her real name was Hedwig Marie Keisler. She was born in Vienna, Australia, Austria-Hungary, which is next to Germany. And parents were Emil Keisler and Gertrude, called Trude Keisler. And her maiden name was Lickwich. Her family was very well-to-do and quite prominent, the mother of Heady Lamar. Heady Lamar's name was chosen later in order to have something simpler to work for Marquise, because she made movies. Her face was the inspiration for Disney's Snow White and the inspiration for the original Catwoman in the comics. And that's a picture of her when she was 8 years old. She said, "I am not ashamed to say that no man I ever met was my father's equal, and I never loved any other man as much." You know, as we're going to think, one of the things we're going to see is she had problems with men, but she was extremely attached to her father, and that's important to our story. Father's name was Emil Keisler, as I said. He was a banker, but he was interested also in inventions. He wanted to know how things worked. And his daughter would take long walks and talk about the things they saw and how they worked. On long walks with the father, they talked about those things, how they were put together. When she was only 5 years old, she took apart an antique music box and put it back together again. And I tried to copy a picture of it to show you it was a complicated music box. Which 5 years old, she took it apart and put it back together. Kind of reminds me of my dad, who at 8 years old took apart a watch that his grandmother gave him, and at 10 years old took apart his bicycle and put it all back together. He was mechanically apt. I am mechanically inept. I can't do that sort of thing. Another quote from Heady: "My mother always called me an ugly weed, so I never was aware of anything until I was older. Plain girls should have someone telling them they are beautiful. Sometimes this works miracles." I like that quote. But although her mother called her an ugly weed, she and her mother were very close also. Her mother was a concert pianist. She was in Austria-Hungary, and in 1938, Germany invaded. It's called the Anschluss. And they were taking over Austria-Hungary. And Heady had already come to America, and then she arranged for her mother to come to the United States also, listing her as being Hebrew for naturalization. She actually was Catholic, but that way she could get into the country. Although both her parents were raised Jewish, her mother had converted to Catholicism at her first husband's insistence, and that's why she was raised Catholic. When she was just 12 years old, she won a Vienna beauty contest. Many people had described her as being the most beautiful woman in the world. She starred in her first movie in Austria when she was just 17 years old. And that's where her fame is. Everybody knows, or those of us old enough to know, Heady Lamar, consider her a movie star. She made a movie called Ecstasy in 1933 when she was 18 years old. That was a big problem because it was the first mainstream movie to feature full nudity and to feature intercourse. She said that they tricked her, that nothing really happened, that it was sort of like early version of Adobe, changing everything around. But the movie itself became a major scandal and tended to haunt her for all her life. Another picture of her from 1934. She married her first husband, Fritz Mandel, who was a munitions manufacturer. And he was a Nazi. She said, I knew very that I could never be an actress while I was his wife. He was very demanding. He was the absolute monarch in his marriage. I was like a doll. I was like a thing, some object of art, which had to be guarded and imprisoned, having no mind, no life of its own. And she actually fled to Europe to get away from him. She got a maid to dress to look like her, and then she got out and left on a bicycle and rode away. Later, she met Louis B. Mayer and went to work for MGM, which is Metro-Goldwyn. And she made 30 films, some were MGM, some were not, from 1938 to 1958. She was starring opposite many of the leading men of those days. I won't bother to go through all the names because you guys probably wouldn't know them, but for those of us that are older, Clark Gable and a whole bunch of others that were very... Many critics and fans said that she was the most beautiful woman ever to have been in films. Two of the movies she made were also, she was also the producer of the movie, and she was the very first actor, male or female, to get credit as a producer of the film. She actually started her own film company. She had 6 marriages. Each of them was falling apart after a very short time. They usually lasted 1 to 2 years. Some of the men she married were alcoholics, some were adulterers, some wanted a showcase wife. That was all a problem. And we had, as I said, the first one was a munitions person selling munitions to the Nazis. The second, screenwriter and producer, Marky, and having trouble seeing with the reflection. Loder, who was an actor, who becomes more important later, and Stauffer, Lee, who was the Texas oil man, and Bowles, her divorce lawyer. Yeah, I was trying, it's too small. I should have made bigger print. I'll know next time. Another quote from Heady: "Every girl would like to marry a rich husband. I did twice. But what divides girls into 2 groups is this question: do you first think of money and then love, or vice versa?" She had a lot of advice she gave people. She had 3 children: James, Lamar, Marky. He was adopted by her and Marky. He was an out-of-wedlock son that she had, and the father was John Loder. Then later, when she left Marky, she married John Loder, who was an actor, and they had 2 more kids, Denise and Anthony. She met a man named Howard Hughes. He was a very important man of the time. He was an aviation tycoon. He was into creating new things, working with making new airplanes. He gave her equipment so that she could work on inventing, because she liked to do that in her spare time. He actually set up a lab in her trailer whenever she was making a movie. After making a movie, a lot of people would go out and party. She'd go back to her trailer and work on inventions. He wanted planes to go faster. The Germans in World War II had very fast planes, and that was a problem. They were defeating our planes a lot. And so Heady went and got some books about the fastest birds and the fastest fish. And so she combined what she found there to design an airplane. And she came up with these swept-back wings that proved to be much better for the airplanes instead of the old box type. And Hughes adopted that. And he said that she was a genius, and he changed his planes because of what she had to say. And that's a photo of her playing in her lab, inventing things. She worked with chemicals and she worked with materials. She borrowed two chemists from Howard Hughes and developed a cube that could be added to water to make a drink like Coca-Cola, because soldiers out in the field didn't have access to bottles of Coca-Cola. And it was a great idea that failed, because even in the United States, different cities, the water quality varied a lot. And sometimes they'd drop in the cube, it would go to the bottom like it was supposed to, and then it would effervesce, make the carbon dioxide bubbles, and add the flavor. Sometimes it would stay on top, sometimes it would go to the middle. It just was too inconsistent, and it didn't work out. Heady wanted to contribute to the war effort. During World War II, she knew that the torpedoes that the Allies were using were not hitting their targets, because once launched, if the target moved, the torpedo was going in the wrong direction. So she worked out a way to use radio control to change the direction of the torpedo after it had been launched, so it could still hit the target. And she worked out a way to block interference with the radio signal by something called frequency hopping, because the Germans could send out radio signals to block what was signal being sent by the Allies to the torpedo. She worked with a pianist named George Antel, and they worked together to develop the mechanism to use for the torpedoes. He compared it to the roll on a player piano, the roll of music, and they got a patent on it, and they gave that patent to the Navy, no charge. And the Navy told them that, well, that's a silly idea. You want to put a piano inside a torpedo? Which wasn't the idea that they were saying, but the Navy turned it down, and it was put away somewhere. Nobody knew. But later, they developed, the Navy gave that patent to somebody else who developed what are called sonobuoys. And those were buoys that were out in the ocean. And then also it was used, the same idea used for the ships that we had blockading the Russian ships trying to come into Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So their patent was used. And there's a portion of that patent for frequency hopping, also called spread spectrum radio technology. And there's a diagram they made that's part of the patent. Now, it may not seem like it was all that big a deal, especially since the Navy ended up not using it. But frequency hopping actually led to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, cell phones. Basically, she's the inventor of the technology for all of that. She always said she had the creative ideas, and then Antel, the piano player, came up with the mechanisms to do it. Never got any money for their patent, and if the patent had been upheld in court, It's estimated it would have brought her $30 billion. But the Navy said they never developed it until it was past the expiration date. She still wanted to help the war effort. And so she left MGM and went to work. Well, she wanted to work for the National Inventors Council, inventing things, but they didn't want her. They turned her down because she's just an actress and she's just a woman. But she was asked then to go ahead and sell war bonds. And she did. And she's credited with selling $25 million in war bonds. Other big stars selling war bonds would bring in maybe $2 million. But she brought in $25 million, which is the equivalent of $350 million in current money. She lived the last 35 years of her life in seclusion. She became basically a hermit. She was very unhappy with the way she looked. And she did not age well. And she was treated very badly by the press. And they make fun of her. And she had many plastic surgeries. Actually, I was listening to one of her plastic surgeons who said she would come in and tell them, I want you to make a cut here, make another cut here, here behind the ear where it won't show. And she actually changed the way a lot of plastic surgery was being done and improved it considerably. She also was under the care of Max Jacobson, who was known as Dr. Feelgood. He was a quack. And he got her hooked on methamphetamines. Also, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States, who had back problems. Dr. Feelgood would give him shots. He would tell them it was vitamins and other stuff. Well, the other stuff was meth. And turned them into addicts and created many problems for them. She has received a lot of awards, and I've just put a few of them here. She got the Electronic Frontier Foundation's Pioneer Award. She was the first woman to receive the Invention Convention's Bowlby-Nass Spirit of Achievement Award. That's considered the Oscars of inventing. And after she had died in 2014, posthumously she was taken into the National Inventors Hall of Fame for the frequency hopping red spectrum technology. And the movie Bombshell, I think that was last year or the year before. The movie came out called Bombshell, and it's the story of Heady Lamar and how she was an actress, a beautiful lady, and an inventor. And that's just to cover myself. Those were the sources of some of my information, including that movie. I went ahead and bought it because it's a good movie. So, I forgot I put that slide in there. So, your homework for the people on Teams watching this, you're to come up with a PowerPoint lesson about a famous woman scientist, 5 to 10 minutes long, has to be emailed to Carl. It says there by this Wednesday, because last week's Friday night was canceled. That means it's a different Wednesday. I'll put all that in the email I send out later tonight. And there's many more women than what I had there. So, that's it. Thank you.